Hello and welcome to our flipped instructional session where we're going to take a look at phases of the moon. This is Unit 5, Lesson 7, and this is the teacher graded assignment for this unit. So let's go ahead and jump into the lesson. You can see the drop box here so that you know that this is in fact your teacher graded assignment. But we're going to start with our lesson introduction and take a look at some of the phases of the moon first. So let's start out by taking a look at our lesson introduction. And so it starts out with a picture here and an introduction that says, "Do you know what's wrong with this picture? It appears as if Washington and his troops are crossing the Delaware during the day under a bright sky. In actuality, the famous crossing occurred at night under a waning crescent. The Revolutionary troops used the darkness to their advantage as they marched into Trenton at night. They surprised the Hessian troops the next morning and won the Battle of Trenton in under an hour. This became a turning point in the Revolutionary War. How might the outcome of the Revolutionary War have been different if Washington and his troops had crossed under a full moon? Maybe they would have seen them coming." And this is something that maybe if you see the picture and you don't think through all of those details, it wouldn't be an observation that you would make. But when we start studying the phases of the moon and you start putting all of it together, it makes sense, and you'll notice things like this. So we're going to start out with a topic review here. Remember that the moon does not create its own light. It reflects the rays of the sun. The amount of the moon that is lit up in the sky depends on its position in its revolution. Remember, the moon is revolving around the earth, and so depending on where it is in relation to its revolution around the earth, it's going to depend how much of the lit up portion of the moon that we see when we are viewing from Earth. So review some of the key terms about the phases of the moon. So let's do a quick review here in this video. We said that the moon reflects the sun's light. Remember that half of the moon is always lit up. And then as the moon revolves, we see different amounts of that light, but half of the moon is always lit up from the sun. So during a new moon, we would see the non-lit side of the moon. So if you take a look here at this diagram, it's like the moon is in between the sun and the earth. And so this side of the moon is lit up, but from Earth, we don't see that side at all. So this would be a new moon. A full moon would be just the opposite of that. The Earth is in between the sun and the moon, and so half of the moon is lit up, and we see all of that lit up side. So that would be a full moon. Taking a look at some of the shapes that we see, one of the shapes is a gibbous, and I always say give us more light. Like if we had just a little bit more light, the moon would be full, and so that's how I remember that word. But gibbous means humpbacked, and so the gibbous moon is a shape that is between a half circle and a full circle. A crescent is the shape of a crescent, which kind of looks like a fingernail or the edge of a fingernail. And so that's talking about the shape. You can have a half or quarter moon as well. And then the light is either growing or it is becoming less. And so we use the terms waxing. Waxing means that it's growing in size. During the waxing period, more and more of the moon becomes visible until eventually we see the full moon. How I know when I look up at the sky and I see the moon, if it's waxing or waning, I look, and if the light is on the right side, like it is in this picture, I know that it's waxing. I'm right-handed, and if I were waxing a car, I would do that with my right hand. And so that's how I remember that if the light is on the right, it is waxing. Waning means shrinking in size. So the moon is waning when the amount of light reflected off the moon surface toward Earth decreases. So following this period would be your new moon. So it's going to be getting less and less until you see none of the lit up portion of the moon. And so here's a diagram that I like that shows the Earth. It shows the moon's revolution around the Earth and what we are seeing. So here is the sun over here, you can see that half of the moon is always lit up, but depending on where it is in its revolution, it depends on what we can see. And so you can see from this spot on Earth here, you would see a gibbous, but look, it's on the left side, so that's going to be a waning gibbous. So let's start with our new moon. We see none of the light. And then the light will start growing, right? The light is on the right side, so this is waxing. So we'll first see that crescent shaped. Then we'll see the first quarter because the right side is lit up. And then we'll see the waxing gibbous, and then we'll see the full moon when we see the whole half of the moon lit up. Then it's going to start becoming smaller. It's going to be waning. So first it'll be waning gibbous, a third quarter, waning crescent, and then back to the new moon. So I like this diagram. It's a good one to print out and take a look at to remember those moon phases. So on the get ready procedure portion, it tells us what's the importance of some of the moon phases. And we saw that on the lesson introduction partly, right? Military, it's going to depend on if at nighttime you have a lot of light or less light, right? So military, farming, culture, all of that is some of the importance of the moon phases. It repeats every 28 days. Each phase is 3 to 4 days. And we said waxing is getting bigger towards full, waning towards the new moon. All right, so you have a phases of the moon exploration. You're going to complete this activity and answer the questions. So go ahead and click on that assignment and you can open that up. So this assignment is pretty straightforward. Below are some description of the moon's phases on certain days in history. And in the table below, you're going to draw the moon at its phase. Sketch a diagram of the moon and its revolution around the Earth based on that phase. And in the sketch, show where the sun is located by drawing 2 dashed lines coming out of the Earth. So let's see what it's talking about here. The first one's done for us. So it says March 14th, 1879. Physicist Albert Einstein is born in Germany. So this is our important date in history. And it tells us that the moon phase was in a third quarter. So if it's in a third quarter moon phase, we got to think, is it waxing or waning? So we know which side to put the light on, right? And if we remember our diagram, third quarter is waning. So that means that the light side of the moon, where we see the light, would be on the left-hand side. And so this is a perfect example of half of the moon is always lit up, right? So this is what it's going to look like in the third quarter moon phase. We're going to see that whole half that's lit up here. All right, and we can take a look back at this diagram here, and this is what our phases should look like, right? If it's third quarter, we see that whole quarter or that whole half of what we see lit up. Does that make sense? If it told us another one, then we would make it look according to these right here. So if it was a crescent shape, then I want to see the crescent shape drawn in there. Okay, so third quarter looks like this with the light side being on the left-hand side. And we see half of that lit up. Now for the second part to show the moon's orbit. It's telling us to sketch a diagram of its revolution around the Earth. Show where the sun is located by drawing 2 dashed lines coming out of the Earth. So when we look at this diagram here, this is the Earth. The 2 dashed lines coming out of the Earth are here. So that means that the sun would be up here, right? So if this is the sun over here where this dashed line's coming out of the Earth, where would it be in its revolution to be that third quarter? Remember, it starts as a new moon, it becomes a full moon, and then it begins getting smaller, and here we are at the third quarter. So if we refer back to this diagram, and remember where it is in relation to that third quarter moon, we would start here at the new moon, and it would go almost all the way around, and here be a third quarter. So you're just going to have this portion not in orbit. So you just have that one portion. Okay, so you will continue on drawing each phase of the moon and how far has it revolved around, starting with that new moon phase. Okay, so I would always start right here with the sun right here and show me how far around it goes. All right, Then for the second part, you're just going to have some questions to answer. Is the moon changing shape? Explain. So I want several sentences here explaining. Why does the shape of the lighted part of the moon change when viewed from Earth? So explain that to me. And those are the only 2 questions that you have to answer. So that's all for this teacher grade assignment. Make sure that for that teacher grade assignment you do save as. Most likely you're going to need to print that out, draw on that, and then scan it or take a picture with a smartphone or tablet and attach that picture or image to this. That's going to probably be the easiest thing if you don't have a scanner. And then you will have, back in your lesson portion, you'll have your conclusions. This portion does not have to be turned in, but is a good review over everything that you've just learned. And then before you leave the lesson, you've got one more review here, just a quick knowledge check, remembering how many phases, and answer the following questions of what the moon is looking like in each of its phases. And that completes your Unit 5, Lesson 7 teacher graded assignment. Next steps are to look for a flip follow-up session in your Class Connect schedule, attend that live session, carry this topic and others further into practice. You can also stay for Help Lab. If you have any questions on your course, have fun, and I will see you on the flip side.